Hello, everyone. I'm Sarabeth Burke, and I've been doing this series on the Great Reinvention. I've got two wonderful guests today where we're really going to dive into this notion of a career paradigm shift that I think many of us have been experiencing because the world has been changing enormously, not just in the last 2 years with the pandemic and hybrid work, but even before that, people have been doing more side gigs and changing what it means to go up the career ladder and just having more options in the workforce than ever. And so, traditionally, what we've used as career tools and tips really aren't the same today as they used to be. And we're going to really dive in and rethink who are you in your work. My guests today are Dorie Clark and Simon Alexander Ong, and they are both more than their job titles. I consider myself to be a researcher of professional identity, focusing on this notion of hybridizing your multiple professional identities into this new form of yourself that's really hard to name. And both of my guests emulate that and have their own stories and trajectories of breaking the mold of not just being their job title. So we're going to hear this robust conversation. I'm going to bring them up. Hello, Dorie. Hello, Simon. Oh, I
Good
know.
to be here. Hi, Sarabeth.
Thanks.
Hey, Sarabeth, good to be here as well.
Thank you. This is just a great moment because I've adored and just really studied all of your work. Dorie, I've been reading what you've written in HBR about hybridizing, and it's caused me to follow and just be inspired by both of you. So congratulations, Simon, too. Your book just came out, and I'm excited to read it as soon as I could get a copy. So let's kick this off a little bit on just defining what the heck is going on in the idea of a career. So I'm curious how both of you are thinking, what is this career paradigm shift? When I say that, what comes up to your mind?
Dorie.
I'll start. Absolutely. So it's obvious that things have changed a lot in the past couple of years. And it's interesting. I think that in order to have as helpful of a discussion as possible, it's important to granularize in some ways because there's a couple of different things that are happening. One is at the lower wage level, which is fairly significant, and then there's I think a related but separate phenomenon happening amongst knowledge workers. Certainly in the United States, where we're seeing a huge amount of churn, and anybody who's tried to buy things at Walmart or go to shops or whatever has seen this. There has been massive turnover in lower wage occupations, especially retail, especially hospitality and things like that. And it's all been part of this upward wage pressure. And so many people, it's not necessarily that they're dropping out of the workforce, but they're often switching jobs rapidly because they realize they can get more money down the street. And so that's an interesting phenomenon that's just created a lot of pressures that compound with the supply chain pressures that we experienced during the early part of the pandemic. There's also at the higher tiers of the socioeconomic strata, these kind of questions, these existential questions that COVID has brought forward about, well, where do I want to be working? How do I want to be working? What do I want to do with my life? This could all go away tomorrow. And so it's created a lot of interesting questions about what the so-called workforce of the future is going to look like and what workers will be demanding now that at least for the time being, the power dynamic seems to have shifted toward labor and away from capital, at least for the moment. Simon, what do you think?
Yeah, Simon.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was nodding my head, Dorie, because I echo what you said about the higher levels of the socioeconomic strata, as you put it, because there's a statement in my book in which I write that the longest journey we as humans make are the inches from our heads to our hearts. Now, I think that for many of us, we haven't had the opportunity to make that journey because so many of us have been on this hamster wheel. So, we're running, we're moving from place to place, never really living in the moment. And so when the pandemic hit, it was almost like an unexpected pause. So for many of us, we suddenly had this time that we could spend at home, and we were working out what to do with it because many of us had never worked from home before. We were so used to commuting into an office, to be in a physical environment, to be alongside our colleagues. And so now that we had this opportunity to pause, we've had the space to explore some of those existential questions that Dorie shared. And that is what has, I think, created this shift towards exploring, well, what is meaningful work for me rather than work I think I should be doing. And so people have had the chance and the space to explore that. And I think that's why we're seeing big shifts in people moving careers, moving cross country, or just trying out things that they would never have done before. And so it's really fascinating how people now, and sort of connecting with your work, Sarabeth, are looking to move beyond their title. They're not using that as a way to limit their potential, but now they're thinking, well, what else can I do?
I mean, we have definitely been in an accelerated moment where this YOLO economy of like, what do I really want to do has come to the top of our minds.
I really hope that's your next book, Sarabeth. The YOLO economy has a nice ring to it.
That was in New York Times. They took it first. It's a good one. But I've been tracing your footsteps for both of you, and your careers both have been very nonlinear. And each of you around 2006 to 7 made some major shifts. And so, first of all, I'm curious, how do you define yourselves? Like, as these multi-passionate, multi-hyphenate Renaissance people, you haven't stayed in one career. You've changed many jobs. You've had many job titles. So who are each of you today? How do you define yourself in whatever path you're on?
Why don't we start with you for this one, Simon?
Definitely. Well, it's a great question, because one of the challenges I give some of the mentees I work with when they start running businesses is I often challenge them not to use a title. So it's an interesting question, I think, how I would categorize myself. And there's a guy, I don't know if you follow him, there's a guy that has inspired me when I build up my public speaking journey. It's a guy called James Whitaker. And I still remember the first time that he was asked the question, James, what do you do? And he didn't lead with a title, but he led with a story that made you ask the question, tell me more.
Yeah.
And he said, I have been saving the world from boredom since before you were born. And suddenly it makes you go, well, tell me more. What do you do? How do you do it?
Yeah.
And so that's one of the ways I've been looking to introduce myself when people ask me what I do, is to lead with a story. But if I had to think of what I do as a title that captures a lot of the different things that I do in my work, I would probably say, and it's sort of a bit cliche as well because it connects to my book, that I would call myself an energizer. Because whether it is coaching, whether it is speaking, whether it is writing, whether it's engaging with people in person, I'm always looking to awaken people's imagination to what is possible by showing them that there is always a different perspective to the way they're seeing their reality.
And that was really well said, because it echoes, I call myself a creative disruptor. That's how I see myself in my work, no matter what organization or who I'm working with. And you were able to define your identity as Energizer. And that, to me, becomes the new story you tell with the what do you do. And so it changes these paradigms of even introducing ourselves. And Dorie, I know you talk a lot about branding yourself and reinventing yourself. And so how do you talk about yourself in your work?
Well, I like a piece of what you mentioned, Simon. I'll just pick up on that. There's a concept that I talk about sometimes, which I call playing conversation chicken. Like, so if you're playing chicken with someone, like, if it were like the 1950s or something, you'd be like drag racing, and you see which is the first one to veer off before you go over the cliff or what have you. And my version of conversation chicken is that you need to be in a competition with the other person that you're meeting to talk about yourself last, to talk about yourself least. Because, I mean, first of all, I don't know about you guys, I'm pretty bored with myself, especially after like 2 years of the pandemic. Like, all you're doing is video chats, and it's like, oh my God, spare me. I don't want to hear about me anymore. But also, you can do a much better job connecting with the other person if you actually learn enough about them, so that you can identify the points of commonality that would be most salient to them and just lead with that. So I try to avoid talking about myself as long as possible in a conversation.
Wait, so I mean, yes, like this one-on-one video chat is getting old, and like, it's great the world's opening so we can have more social time again. But you're also making me think of the concept by Marilyn Brewer called optimal distinctiveness. And I think that applies to all of us and many people watching, that we're always trying to fit in and stand out simultaneously, because you want to find that relatability. You want those relational connections. But Dorie, I know in your work, you talk about how do you stand out. I mean, it's one of your books. So can we lean into that in this career space that we're in? Because we need to do both.
Yes, absolutely. So in terms of distinctiveness and how to stand out, which you are indeed correct. I did write a book about it. I mean, ultimately, I think that one of the key things that we need to be thinking about as we're presenting ourselves, and as we're actually thinking about what is the contribution that we could be making, um, is understanding how are we contributing something distinctive? Because I think all of you guys have probably experienced in the past that there are a lot of business books, let's say,
Mhm.
just for example, written that you read them and you're like, okay, this is lovely, but this isn't necessarily anything new.
Yeah.
And ideally we want to be the people that are creating
Mhm.
something new, that that's distinctive enough that we want to be the Maryland Brewers that you're coaching, or the that you're quoting, or the James Whitaker that you're quoting,
Mhm.
Simon. So, in terms of how to actually do that, I think there's a lot of different ways that we can start. One of the favorite strategies that I have, and I lay out a lot of different ones, is actually this kind of excavation of your unique background. Because you were mentioning earlier, Simon, you're a banker, you
Mhm.
transitioned.
Yeah.
Eh, a lot of times we think of our past, whatever it was, in some ways, as, I'm not saying you personally, but a lot of times we almost treat it as this sort of shameful thing, like, oh, I got to get rid of that and not talk about it, because otherwise people will think I'm less legitimate in my new thing, in my new identity. They won't think of me as purely a coach or purely a writer. They'll be like, oh, that guy was a banker or whatever. And one of the things that I've discovered is that actually we can be strongest and most unique and most successful if we actually lean into the place that we're transitioning from, ironically. So that's one of the ways that
Yeah.
I have found that can be helpful in terms of thinking about how to stand out.
So much good stuff in there. It's making me think, Simon, too, that when you were in that space of reinventing yourself, I heard you tell a story of, I think it was seeing Tony Robbins on stage, and you were more captivated by his energy of how he stood out as a speaker and the stories he told and how he made you feel. And that inspired you to focus on your own energy and lean into that more. And so I think that might be one of the ways you stand out. Tell me more. Tell me how, if
Yeah,
that
so
makes sense.
there's sort of two thoughts that come to my mind, and one in response to what you shared, so Beth. Yes, it was. I remember going to one of the Tony Robbins events, and there were so many people around me who
Mhm.
were scribbling down the content that he was sharing.
Right.
Now, for me, I didn't go to consume the content because I already knew a lot of his work. I read his books, I've watched the videos. But for me, I went in with trying to understand what he was doing. I codify the process by which he did it. How did he start the talk? How did he end the talk?
Mm.
How many stories did he tell? When did he walk into the audience? When did he gesture to audiences at a particular time? When did he pause? And I found that that taught me so much more than just the content alone, because I got an insight into how people did what they did. And so that allowed me to then put my own stamp on it. But I think
Mhm.
going back to what Dorie was saying about standing out, I think what really helped me to understand how to stand out in the work that we do is really about diversifying our environment. One of the things I often say to people, regardless of industry, is that if you're only looking at your competition, you can only be as good as your competition, which limits your progress, which limits your creativity and ability to innovate. Now, if you surround yourself with people who are outside of your industry, from very different backgrounds and fields, but are also sharing your same values, then what happens is then you start thinking very different. Just to
Mhm.
give you two examples, I connected with the world's best bartender at the Connaught Hotel here in London, and we came together and we had a brainstorm. And he said, Simon, how about I design a cocktail to mark the launch of your book? And we'll call it the Energize cocktail, and people can order it at the bar. And then I meet a BBC film director, and I get
Mm.
inspired by his film journey. And he inspires me to create a book trailer. So when you go into YouTube and search my book, you'll see a film trailer, like 1 minute trailer come up. Now you see that for films, but I thought, why don't I bring that into my
Mm.
book? So instead of
It's
coming,
just one big cocktail
yeah.
shaker.
It's like you're having fun, aren't you, Dorie? Like saying, what ingredients can I put in? How can I mix it? And you come up with your unique blend, if you will. And I
Yes.
think that goes back to what you were saying, Sir Beth, about how do we stand out? How do we find our uniqueness?
Yes.
That is how we go about doing so.
Yes. I want to hold on that concept, that unique blend, because I see people as special recipes, that we are bringing these accumulated professional identities into our work as our careers build and grow. And as you blend your different professional identities together, you have your own hybrid recipe. And that's that special flavor, like the Energize cocktail. And yet we haven't named it. We're still calling ourselves by these generic, boring
Mm.
job titles. I hate to say it, Simon, but we're all authors. Like that's pretty bland. And who are we really? I think that's the bigger question I'm noticing in today is you have to know yourself. Not
Mm.
only how are you distinct and different, most people don't know their uniqueness. That's already a puzzle. But the who am I in my work, that existential work identity is unknown. And it's an internal self-awareness piece that if you can't explain who you are, I think you get lost in the shuffle. And
Mm.
so hybridization or understanding professional identity, I feel is a missing piece to this puzzle that suddenly is becoming more prominent. Even Esther Perel is talking about the identity economy. And I'm
Mm.
fascinated by that because it really shifts the attention from just workers and what they do to who they are and valuing them as individuals. Have any
Mm.
of you come across this in your work?
Dorie?
Yeah, thank you, Simon. Thank you, Sarah Beth. Yeah, I think this is a really interesting point because, I wrote an article a couple of months ago for the
Mm.
Wall Street Journal about, I think it was called like, the 6 types of workers you'll meet post pandemic. And the thesis was basically that prior to the pandemic, even if this wasn't strictly true, we all essentially had a kind of shared cultural understanding about what workers aspired to. There was kind of this view that like, oh, well, everybody wants to come in and they want to work their way up and, they want to get promoted. And, that's the logical thing. I mean, of course, there's the asterisks of like, oh, well, this one's not so committed or whatever. But, in general, it's like, okay, it's a forward march. And now, post pandemic, what we need to realize is that those assumptions have really been
Mm.
shattered and that
Mm.
people are coming in with a lot of different expectations. I mean, certainly there still are plenty of people that, yes, they do want to get promoted. They want to, be from, manager to director to VP to SVP. And that's the path that they're on. And that's great. But there's also a lot of people that have taken, as we were discussing earlier, a more sort of work to live philosophy about like, yeah, I'm gonna do what I need to do, but really I want to fly fish or whatever their
Yeah.
thing is. And you've got people that we also have a lot of interesting situations where it's retirees or quasi retirees that are actually kind of in it to stay engaged, stay interested with things. We've got people who maybe on a temporary basis because of pandemic related caregiving responsibilities or all the mishigas with schools, they might be actually quite ambitious, but at least for a period of time, they really can kind of only do the minimum and we have to, deal with that. So ultimately what this means is that if we want to be successful as managers, in sort of corralling all of the cats that we have in our workplaces, we have to be thoughtful about the individual situations. If you try to go one size fits all, it's not really going to work. I mean,
Mm.
technically, it never worked great, but it was plausible. It kind of worked well enough. But what the pandemic has shown is like, you know what? It's not going to work well enough anymore. It's going to go badly very quickly. And so we have to be a lot more thoughtful and intentional about personalizing strategies, which means that you actually have to get to know your employees well enough to understand what motivates them, what their needs are, and what they're trying to get out of all this.
Oh, like so many thoughts coming to my mind with that. The last comment about personalizing strategies really hit home because it's not a one size fits all. I hear from so many people that are transitioning or frustrated. They are tired of trying to be fit into a box and pigeonholed and compartmentalized. Like that limits people to only showing up in a certain way when people are multidimensional. And so this personalization and flexibility are really becoming prominent. And the other idea you dropped that I want to capture is success, right? Like, what is success anymore in a career? And Simon, you had mentioned in a talk or two that you used to define success by your job title.
Mm.
What you were called mattered. It gave you a sense of pride and authority and positioning. But that wasn't really success, right? Do you want to unpack what you've learned about success in your career?
Yeah, so to that point, Sarabeth, grew up believing that success was defined by my job title. And so
Mhm.
that limited my field to around 4 or 5 jobs, because those were the ones that I knew would make my family very, very proud. But what I realized, especially as I exited the financial industry and had to pivot careers and pivot what I was doing, is that many of us are exhausted not because we're doing too much, but one, we're doing too little of the things that bring us joy. And second, is because we are running someone else's race. And when we are running someone else's race, they get to decide what success means for us, and they define the metrics by which we make progress. And so, unless we take back ownership on what success means for us and what
Mhm.
progress means for us, we are going to be in a race that we can never win. And that's why it was such an important journey for me to drop that definition of success and begin the journey to discover what that was for myself. And I think it was so important because that then gave me the responsibility to not just own my present, but to own where and who I wanted to be.
Oh, that's a big deal. That's the empowerment of taking the power back for yourself as opposed to letting somebody else define it for you. And I
Mm,
think that's what I've realized in my own career, that when I could separate myself of how do I see myself and who do I want to be aside
mm,
from how the world is defining me, I've been able to step into this new place of realizing I love helping people realize their professional identity, the
mm,
truest identity they've been carrying that they never knew because they're letting people assign it to them.
mm,
So defining our own success and defining ourselves, I think, is critical to
mm,
today when there is no one directional career path. It is anything you want. And I think that dovetails well back to you, Dorie, of what is this long-term idea of we're so focused on right now and what I want in my career and what's not working and what is. How do we expand and allow ourselves to think in a bigger picture way?
Yeah, it's such an important question because there's always short term considerations. I mean, the hardest part, of course, about long term thinking. I mean, for any rational person, if you had an apples to apples choice between a good thing now or a good thing later, anybody would take the good thing now, of course. But the problem is that there are often good things that can only be obtained later. They can
Mhm.
only be obtained with effort, with time, with strategy, with work. And I mean, no matter how fast you insist that the crop grows, the crop is going to take months to grow. It's not gonna come up tomorrow. And so the real question that we have to be aware of, for all of us is, okay, do we take the you know reasonably nice, but small thing now, or do we actually make a bet? Do we make a
Right.
wager that we can get the really really good thing down the road? And what's hard about it is that these things are not guaranteed. Again, if they were guaranteed, everybody would do it. But for me, in a lot of ways, I really think of this as kind of a modern test of character.
Yeah.
Are you willing to make that wager? Are you willing to put in the effort, understanding that it might not happen, but being willing to accept that, to reckon with it, and say, you know what, it it's important enough to me that whether or not it works, it will have been worth it to me to have attempted
Mm.
it. And that is something that not everyone is willing or able to do, but I have enormous respect for the people who are.
This is like the adult marshmallow test, that delayed gratification. Like, can you make
Very much so. In fact, in the new book, in the long game, last chapter, I bring it out. I bring out the marshmallow test.
You
Yes.
bring out your marshmallow game.
Right.
It's also echoing, that phrase, an overnight success was 10 years in the making. And yet we live in a culture where people are turning into YouTubers and making 6, 7 figures in a month. So how do we reconcile that when we're being faced with instant success, supposedly, and mega money and quick reward if you do X thing? But yet there's also that delayed thing of a lot can happen if you plant seeds and give it time to grow and allow these beautiful things to happen that you didn't anticipate. Like, how do you help people balance these two sides of culture right now?
Well, I can jump in briefly, and then I'd love to hear what Simon thinks. I mean, I think honestly, part of it's a question of what is your sphere, what is your industry you're working in. I'm not sure I've really ever heard of somebody that has been an overnight success as a business author. Like, look, oh yeah, I mean, he was a truck driver, and then he went viral on TikTok, and now he's a Harvard professor. Can you believe it? Like, that doesn't really happen in this particular field.
Right.
It is true that certainly in entertainment, for instance, there are a lot of things that people find entertaining, and there are certainly some overnight successes there. But I think what is most critical is actually unpacking, and this is a theme that I talk about in the long game. It's unpacking what are the most typical paths to success, because there's always going to be an aberration, but if you look at enough examples to really get a sense of typically what does it take, if you want to be a law firm partner, I mean, I guess maybe there's someone somewhere in the world that got their JD, passed the bar, and became a partner within a year, but there's probably one. Like, that's not a thing. This is a 7-year process, an 8-year process, a 9-year process. Pretty much everybody knows that is the standard. And it turns out there are standards in almost every other field too. We just don't know them. And I think that it's actually a failure of research in a lot of ways for people to be able to contextualize things. One of the stories that I actually tell in the long game is about a great colleague of mine, a guy named David Burkus, who's an author, who's a speaker as well. And he told me this great story about how he was feeling like really kind of down about himself because he had interviewed the author Daniel Pink, the very successful author Daniel Pink, on his podcast. And, basically after the show was over, was sort of asking like, hey, Dan Pink, why am I not as successful as you? What should I be doing differently? And Dan Pink said to him, David, I've been doing it 17 years longer than you have. And at first David was kind of bummed, like, what kind of an answer is that? But then he realized, like, oh, right. And so now he actually tracks his progress against, like, not where is Dan Pink today, but it's what I call time handicapping. It's he tracks himself against where Dan Pink was 17 years ago. And I think that's a lot healthier of a way to think about success, because it's almost irrational to think that you would be as successful as, someone who is a star in their field that's been doing it for 2 decades longer. So we have to really understand the scoping so we don't get discouraged needlessly.
That's such a powerful point. This level setting reality and rethinking, like, what are career milestones anymore? Because they've all shifted and they're unique for each person. And that quote, comparison is the thief of joy. Like, we need to be on our own path, and everyone's happening in different ways in their own life stages, and just enjoy where you are because your journey is your own. Simon, do you want to add on to these thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, Dorie, very beautifully said there. And touching on what you just shared, Sarabeth, about comparisonitis, I think it's so true. Too many of us actually waste our energy comparing ourselves now to people ahead of us. And that can create a lot of self-doubt and limitations on ourselves and our potential. When actually, I think the only person we should really be comparing ourselves to is who we were yesterday. And just be better a little bit each day forward. And just focus on our journey, because the way I imagine it is this: just one step forward. It's only one step forward a day. A year from now, that is 365 steps forward. I mean, just imagine who and where you could be. And then just to finish off about the long-term success and the short-term success, I think long-term success is always more valuable, because in the journey to achieve the things that take over time success, not overnight success, what happens is that we as an individual, we go through a personal metamorphosis. We have to go through an evolution to become the person that can actually deliver that vision. Whereas when many people, and you just have to look at the studies done about this, when many people experience unexpected short-term success, so i.e. they win the jackpot or suddenly go viral overnight, what happens is they'll enjoy that for a short period, but then often those people that win the jackpot end up going back to a position before they won the money, or the people that became famous overnight suddenly spend and splash all of their money on the lifestyle, and they're back to even worse position than where they were before, because they haven't gone through the evolution or the metamorphosis required to be able to handle that level of success. Whereas I think when you go through a journey, you are, if you will, putting the foundations in place to be able to handle what comes next.
Yes, I think these new ideas of a journey, even the fact that I think it's a career trajectory that spirals upwards. There's identity research that talks about we go through periods of exploration, then we achieve some new identity, and then we explore again and we keep replicating that cycle. But we don't often talk about that in our careers, that it's normal to become something and then question it and then shift and become something else. And we keep going through ebbs and flows of that. And that really is what a career is about, is searching, exploring, trying, and redirecting. And that breaks the old stereotype of go up a ladder and it's one directional. Just as a quick question, where were both of you 10 years ago? Like, I'm curious if we rewound the clock, because we're talking about this idea of time, just a decade snapshot. Where were you 10 years ago? Simon.
Perfect. So now I'm just double checking I've got the year correct. So we're 2022 now. 10 years ago was 2012. 2012, I had just signed up for my first coaching certifications. So I literally just signed on the dotted line. I enrolled and I took on 2 certifications, which took me just shy of 2 years to complete. And I was still in full-time employment at that time.
Wow.
So, I was still kind of working my way out of the corporate industry. I was laying the foundation outside of work. It's very different to where I am today.
Exactly. And now you just published your book last week, and that's a decade in the making. I love it. Overnight success. Dorie, what about you?
It's great. Well, a decade ago, actually, literally almost exactly at this time, I was getting ready to go on a trip to Europe. I was going to Europe for a couple of weeks. And while I was in Europe, I got the contract signed and settled for my first book, which became Reinventing You. But I had just in the March 2012 issue, I believe, of Harvard Business Review, I had done or actually no, maybe that was 2011. I don't even know. It's complicated, but I'm pretty sure maybe it was 2011 or 2012. So hard to keep up with these things. But anyway, either a decade or 11 years ago, I had just done my my article about professional reinvention for Harvard Business Review magazine.
Wow.
And then I had been able to land a book contract off of that. So I was just in the process of finalizing it. What I do know for sure is that my book came out in April of 2013. So I was on the brink of having my book come out, but it had not yet come out. I was just finalizing the deal.
And that was your first book or second book?
That was my first, yeah.
Wow. So 10 years ago, you were just becoming an author, and now 4 books later in 2022.
And guys, just to put the time handicap in perspective, Dorie was releasing her first book 10 years ago. I'm just on my first book now. So this shows you that, we're all at different points in our journey, but we can also be inspired by one another.
Yes. And it's hard, right? When you're just kind of entering any kind of field and you see the people ahead of you, you want to get there. That's the short-term quick thinking of, and everyone wants to hack things. It's all about like the quick fix, but it just doesn't work that way. Things do need to marinate. The great ideas happen with a million ahas and then they explode.
Yeah,
I was
get
thinking,
ready, Simon. 2032, you're going to be living in Miami. Who knew?
I love it. Oh,
I'll
yeah.
be showing coffee and cats on my Instagram.
Follow Dorie's Instagram for that insider note. I think 10 years ago, I had just moved back to Denver and I was starting my PhD, and I was kind of a complete mess because I felt lost and confused on what is my career going to be? What am I doing back in grad school? I don't know what's going on. And so it was sort of that pause again to reset. But I love all these little visions. I guess kind of on a final note to wrap us up today, my quick question is, what do you hope to have in 10 years? Like, what is one of those long-term goals, if you can put that out there for us, and or share a great tip from your book to leave us with today? So Simon, do you want to go first?
Sure. So for me, I'm always thinking of sort of what is my bold vision. And of course, it adapts over time because as you take more steps forward, that vision will evolve with you. For me, in 10 years' time, it would be incredible if I was taking some of what I'm doing now and to be able to share that via some of the streaming platforms. So Netflix, Apple, Amazon, Prime, and what have you. So that's sort of one of the bold visions there. In terms of sharing a line for my book that would be helpful for the audience here today, I want to share an activity and then share a line from somebody who inspired me, who I interviewed for the book. So the activity is writing or journaling. You can call it writing or journaling, it's the same thing. But the reason why that is a very powerful activity is because it is the cheapest form of therapy that you have access to. And when we think about self-development and self-growth, you can't experience that in its truest form unless you have self-awareness. And so by writing and understanding your thoughts, you are accessing the beginning of true wisdom. And the line that I want to share with you comes from a lady called Diana Chow. And she spoke at TED and she shared this line about how writing saved her life. And she shared with the audience that writing is humanity distilled into ink. Writing
Mm.
is humanity distilled into ink, because through the process of writing, we get to understand our truest self.
That was great, Simon. Dorie, over to you.
All right. Well, in 10 years, I want to have completely lived out the vision. I first articulated it. I like to make sure that in any good live stream, I hold up every single one of my books. That's the whole point of writing books. So this book, Entrepreneurial You, is about how to create passive income. So I'd say in 10 years, I want 99% of my income to be passive income. So I'm trying to make strategic choices today to enable that to happen. And also, my continuing goal to write a musical that makes it to Broadway by 2026.
Wow, that's a great little side note. We'll have to watch out for that. I'd say in 10 years, I would love to adapt actually some of Dorie's strategies of having multiple revenue streams coming in because I'm diversifying what I'm doing and having a portfolio career and maximizing how I'm making an impact on helping people find and realize their hybrid professional identity. And a tool to share is draw a Venn diagram that if you have multiple professional parts of what you do, who are you at that intersection of the Venn diagram? Is this unique identity that you can bring and share into the world that can really help you see yourself clearly? To everyone, to Simon and Dorie, this has just been outstanding. And I can see there's a ton of comments in the chat, people loving the time handicapped idea, love hearing actually about the 10-year mark in time before and into the future, and just some other great tips. So I know you'll go back and read those. And if people want to follow and find you, which I'm sure they do, let's start with Dorie. What's the best place to
Oh,
go?
thank you so much. Well, I'm going to take a cue from the screen and suggest DorieClark.com. That is a great place to go for 700 plus free articles, etc. And if folks are interested, you can get a long game strategic thinking self assessment. Just go to Dorie. It's free. Just go to DorieClark.com/the long game.
Amazing. So many great tips on that website. And Simon, what about for you?
Sure. So the two platforms I am most active on is LinkedIn or Instagram. LinkedIn, just search Simon Alexander Ong and you can connect with my personal profile. Instagram, it is at Simon Alexander O. And at the bottom there, you will see a link to my new book, which is Energize. And it has had endorsements from the likes of Dorie, who is here, Marshall Goldsmith, Simon Sinek, and Marie Forleo. So go check it out. And I would love to hear your thoughts.
Oh, so many great resources there as well. And lastly, I'm at morethanmytitle.com, where I have all kinds of tools on professional identity and looking at how to figure out who you are in your career, not just what you do. And I really am just excited that we finally had a chance to have this conversation. It's been on my mind, and I've been inspired, as I said, by both of your works, and you are leaders in my life and for many other people. Thank you for this great conversation. It's just been a blast. So thank you everyone watching. Have a great day.